Right, so here we are. Just had my last couple of hour ride on the Norton Commando 961 SP. All up, I've had the bike for about 2 weeks, and I think I've ridden it every other day or so. So I've had about 7 or 8 decent rides on the bike. I've already done a specs and first impression ride video on the bike, which covers a lot. And my overall opinion hasn't actually changed since the first day I rode it. I think this is a great bike, and I'm very happy that a brand like Norton is still making bikes like this in this country. In my first impressions video, I said that an American company called Slacker was going to send me a tool to use to help me measure the sag on the suspension. Well, it hasn't arrived. Got stuck in customs, so I'll have to show you it on the next bike now. But I still went ahead and I did the sag on the bike, and I spent a lot of time tweaking the suspension, which I'll also go into today. So the big pro with this bike is that it's one of the most off-the-shelf modern classics that feels like a proper classic that you can buy brand new today. This is a massive thing for me because I like my bikes to be as right as they can, and as we know, a lot of classic bikes have been compromised over the years by owners having to go and mechanics cutting corners here and there, and that just gets compounded. So I think this bike is one of the closest bikes you can get to an off-the-shelf classic today, and this bike gets a lot of attention. Just today, someone hung their head out the driver's side window as I was riding along just to compliment me on my ride. I do really like the engine on this bike. It is mechanically loud, and everyone I've heard has had a similar sound. I don't think it's bad. Whenever we upload a video of this bike running on here and on our other social media accounts, it always gets a lot of colourful opinions. It is a definite contender for the most diverse range of opinions award. The bike isn't fast by any means, but it has so much character, and that definitely means more to me than the speed of a bike these days. The big 961 parallel twin is lovely to wind up, and it's also just as lovely to wind down through the gears, match revs into corners, and generally just hear running while you're on it. I found myself mainly using the mid-range power on the bike. I did wind it up a fair bit actually to feel what it was like, but it didn't really add to my experience. Also, I feel like it goes a bit flat up top. Not loads, but it is noticeable. Engine doesn't really like to be lugged either, so it does need to be in the right gear. The engine only cut out on me once while I was slowing down as I came into town, so you do need to keep the revs up a touch. Autumn here now, so the days were quite cool, but at no stage did the engine get hot or lost any power. It's got a counterbalancer, and there is a fair bit of vibration throughout the whole rev range. I'd say you feel this more through your body and legs than you do through your hands. Worth saying here that manufacturers' press bikes have their necks wrung from the start of their life, and they're never really treated right from day one. So I always take that in mind when I'm getting a feel for a new press bike from a manufacturer. So there is a degree of tolerance here on my behalf. The gearbox is 5-speed, and I don't feel like it needs more. Changing gears is not clunky, but it's mechanical, which I like. I've only ever found one false neutral while I was riding. I typically use 2 fingers on the clutch, but I found I had to use 4 because the point of engagement was quite close to the bars. Chassis on this bike is definitely one of its standout features. I'm 6'1" with long arms and legs, and I feel like the rider position just suits me right, and I have loads of room to move around on the bike and nothing gets in my way. I do like quite an active ride, so I move around a lot on the bike when I'm riding it, and I didn't find anything was in the wrong place or got in my way. Before I rode the bike, I thought it might be actually too small. The bars are in a good position on the SP version of this bike. I know I wouldn't enjoy the Cafe Racer version of the bike, I'd be too bent over. Tank cutters are great when you're out on the open road. With your legs tucked in, it really helps you move the bike left to right. Initially I thought the foot pegs would be too spaced out, too wide for me, but I've grown to really like them and they help me grip the tank more. I think the fact that your feet are helping push your legs into the tank helps you corner the bike better. Quite a limited steering lock on the bike, and you only really notice it when you're doing a U-turn or parking. I've heard some people nitpick about the colour of the aerospace aluminium used on the top yoke and top steerer nut, but I quite like the look of it. Also, while we're here, not everyone loves the key, but I actually think it fits well with the minimal design of the bike. Overall build quality on the bike, first class. The Olin suspension on the bike really complements the chassis very well indeed. I spent a fair bit of time adjusting the preload, compression and rebound. First thing I did when I set the suspension up was set the sag of the bike back to standard. After testing, I concluded that I needed to add much more preload to both the front and rear springs to make it feel right for me. So the bottom line here is, at 95 kgs, I found that the bike is too undersprung for my weight. Don't get me wrong, it didn't feel bad. I just know that if I went up 1 or 2 spring rates on the front and rear, that the bike would be sprung perfectly for me. This is what I have to usually do with all my bikes anyway. While I was out testing the suspension, I found that you really can get exactly the right amount of compression and rebound dialed in on your forks and shocks. Sometimes forks and shocks don't have the adjustment range, but these do and they work great. To find the right rebound setting, I bounce the forks and shocks until I can feel the rebound valving coming in. Then I go a touch more from there. After testing, I usually add a few more clicks on from there because I feel that either fork or shock is coming back too quickly or it's bouncing. For the compression, I like to wind it off all the way till I can feel the spring rate coming in, then dial it on from there so it's holding up well in the travel and not bottoming, and using a lot of the available travel. This is a typical starting point for setup for me, and I find it works well. And I use the same simple technique for all of the bikes I ride, both on and off road. The technique sort of helps me get in the right ballpark for settings pretty quick. The brakes are great on this bike. I usually use 2 fingers on the front brake. On my first ride, the lever wasn't adjusted right and I had to use 4 fingers, but I adjusted that, so 2 fingers was fine after that. They aren't the most powerful Brembos that I've ever used, but they certainly suit the flowy riding style of this bike really well. I don't think I'd actually want them to be on-off switches on this bike anyway. Initially, I was using the body of the back brake lever to apply the rear brake because I didn't really know where it was. But after time, I soon learned where it was and it wasn't a problem. I've also seen some people nitpick that the foot pegs aren't spring-loaded. This isn't actually a thing for me. They work. The seat doesn't look comfortable, but it is. And you can really put your bum into the back of it when you're trying to get a wriggle on. Tyres are good, didn't have any issues with them. Some say that the bike is heavy at 231 kgs, but it didn't feel heavy to me, so the weight's well proportioned. Cons now. Back brake lever. So when I got the bike, it wasn't actually apparent to me that the brake lever was adjustable. I didn't find out if it was or not, because I really liked where it was, but that might be a thing. When I first started riding the bike, I found myself second guessing whether the side stand was down fully when I put it down. By the end of my time with the bike, I knew where it was. So there's no fuel gauge on the bike, only a fuel light. And if I owned the bike, it wouldn't bother me because I'm used to resetting the trip on my bike when I fill up. Modern riders might not like having a gear indicator or rider aids like traction control. Not an issue for me. I don't really comment on the cost of my bikes in these reviews. I know it's definitely a consideration when you're buying a bike, but I think most people work out if they like something enough to buy it or not, and everyone's in a different situation financially. So if I own this bike, I'd definitely do all the work on the bike myself and would really enjoy getting to know it. It's simple enough that I would be confident to do most things, aside from strip the engine and gearbox down completely. Yeah, I'd definitely change the spring rates on the front and rear suspension. I would spend more time getting the bite point of the clutch dialed in so I could use 2 fingers instead of having to use 4. Final thing, I'd definitely work out how to fine tune the position of that rear brake lever. So that's it. That's my brief pros and cons on the bike. Thanks for watching.